Stephen Hawking went to the island, apparently. I don't think anybody would suspect that he was involved in the, you know what I'm saying?
No, it was a good example.
But it is an example of someone that is, because Epstein, it's not like, he shakes your hand and first time he meets you and says, hey, I'm into little girls. How about you? Right? That is not something that a pervert is going to bring you into that kind of world. And that is something that's, hidden, in their closet. They're not going to bring that forward in public setting.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown, but before we get to the interview, we'd love it if you'd hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review because we love your feedback. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works and how to affect real change. Without further ado, here's the interview. Congressman Eric Burlison, welcome back to the Signal Sitdown.
Great to be back.
So we have to take a little bit of a victory lap because much of what we foretold in the last meeting of the minds was there was going to be a government shutdown. That's the first. Second, something was going to have to be done come hell or high water about the Epstein files. And third, Democrats were going to try to take the shutdown and use it as leverage to get back in the game. I am not surprised whatsoever that those three things came true. What did surprise me the most was that Republicans actually seems to have weathered the shutdown and come out on top, even according to public polling. So first off, before we get into what everyone wants to talk about, which is the Epstein files, and you are one of the best people to talk about it because you are on the Oversight Committee, your takeaways from this incredibly long shutdown, the longest in U.S. history.
Yeah, Bradley, appreciate that. And you kind of led the discussion in the previous episode, and so I appreciate that. But to me, leading up to this, what was interesting is that the Republican conference, every time we would have a meeting for the last 2 years that I've been here, I've only been here for 2.5 years, right? So every time we would have a conference meeting and the subject of a government shutdown would come up, you'd have these old timers go to the microphone in front of the whole conference and predict doomsday. Like they would talk about it like it was the apocalypse that we have to avoid another government shutdown because they said we never win. And it's always more difficult to get out of the shutdown. It's always more painful to get out. But this time, those same old timers, about 1 week in and 2 weeks in, and throughout the entire shutdown, were coming back on when we would have our conference calls, would come to the microphone and say, "This is the first time ever that we are actually have the moral high ground, and we're winning this, and it's time we can't let up." Mm-hmm. So you saw the conference unite for the most part. We had some contrarians, There was probably 3 people that were vocal that said, no, we should come back and we should do something, But at the end of the day, it was probably one of the most unifying moments for Republicans because we truly did have the moral high ground. The fact that you have conservatives, fiscal conservative members of Freedom Caucus, including myself, vote for a CR, which we would never have done in any other circumstance but this one. And I can make arguments why that was fiscally the right thing to do.
Right. You're going to hand it over to the Appropriations Committee and expect them to have government shutdown lower than it was set during the Biden administration, which is shocking to say, but
yeah,
it's the smallest bill the budget could run is that continuing resolution.
It is. And that's, to me, I'm always looking for the path that spends the least amount of money. And when you come to the conclusion a CR right now spends the least amount of money, I'll take that. Mm-hmm. Right. So the fact that we ended up, and the fact we sent over a clean CR with none of our policy changes, we basically sent over the exact budget that the Democrats had voted on previously multiple times. It really put them in a box. And I think even the press, who loves the Democrats and gives them a pass most of the time, even the press were kind of calling their bluff on this.
Yeah, and it was a difficult argument for them to make because they were trying to take Obamacare provisions that are riddled with holes, and we'll circle back to the healthcare conversation because I know that that's what you want to talk about um, in the next month before you guys go on Christmas vacation. But it was a very difficult argument for Democrats to make because they wanted to take these Obamacare subsidies that were riddled with holes and riddled
Mhm.
with problems, such as providing healthcare dollars to people of questionable documentation, illegal aliens and the like.
And that was a big political blunder.
Right. It was a
The
big political blunder
the
because
fact
they
that
couldn't turn it into a broader conversation about
and the
healthcare.
fact that Schumer dropped his own version of a CR, it only gave us something to point to, right?
Right.
And then they couldn't dispute the fact that 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 they wanted to fund illegal immigrants and their health care because there was evidence. You could point to the page and the cite the line of the page.
Right. Even if you aren't one on the right who believes that the Obamacare subsidies were uh, bad enough to allow illegal immigrants to receive taxpayer dollars, in the Chuck Schumer version of the continuing resolution, he wanted to strip out all of the provisions in the one big beautiful bill that
Yes.
protect taxpayer dollars from going towards illegal immigrants. So we'll circle back on the healthcare conversation for sure. But Democrats have tried to find another way to put pressure on the administration and put pressure on Republicans, and that is through the Epstein files.
Hmm.
The Epstein files, the bill is the Epstein Files Transparency Act. It is heading to the president's desk. Yesterday, we're recording this Wednesday morning, the House votes in favor 427 to 1 to advance that piece of legislation. You were a co-sponsor of that legislation. Then the Senate passes it by unanimous consent, which is like shocking to a lot of us who've been watching the Senate for some time, because one of the big hurdles in this administration in particular when it comes to placing personnel is that nothing has been done by unanimous consent. But this was. So let's establish first, what does the Epstein Files Transparency Act do?
What it does is it requires the Department of Justice to release what files that they have, barring any kind of information that would further expose any victims or or any kind of child pornography, any of that kind of material. So by and large, that's what it does. Now, the Oversight Committee, which I'm on, we leading into the shutdown, the few weeks leading up to that point, um, it became clear like oversight was stuck because if we had a hearing, the Democrats were going to offer motions that are privileged motions to subpoena Ghislaine Maxwell, to subpoena, everyone involved, and frankly, I would have voted for those. To me, I've consistently said the victims deserve to have justice. Imagine you were raped as a young girl and your government is not is hiding and protecting the people that were complicit or involved in those actions. It was the very government you're paying your tax dollars to, the one entity, law enforcement, that is supposed to be there to save you, right, to protect you, is the one that's turning on you. I think that the disservice to the victims was, to me, like gut wrenching. And the Oversight Committee met with the victims. We had a conversation with them in the Capitol, and that was heart wrenching to hear their stories firsthand. So I've always been consistent that they deserve to have their justice be done, not just to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but there were a number of other people that were employed, chauffeurs, butlers, people like that absolutely knew what was going on, right? And yet they've all taken a pass, like they were not prosecuted in any way. And then you've got the other Johns that potentially are out there. So all of that has to come to light. And when people say, and I think one of the criticisms of the discharge petition was that you might have innocent people, innocent names, like people. And the truth is, I mean, Epstein was a very, very public, like, socialite, right? I mean, he rubbed elbows with anybody that had money, that was famous, billionaires, all that. So that's, at the end of the day, I think that when the American people look at the facts, we all need to take that into consideration, is that just because you were pictured with somebody doesn't mean that you were also in doing things behind scenes in a dark room with children.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm at events all the time, and I have random people ask me for a selfie nearly every day. And I'm not a jerk. I say, sure, yeah, but I don't do a background check on every person that have taken a selfie with, right? So I think that people need to take a lot of this into consideration, and and what we need is the more information that comes out, even exculpatory evidence like that clears people, says, no, this person had no involvement. They just were at the same party with Epstein, that kind of stuff. That all needs to come out as well. And so, I'm glad. Now what's happened in oversight, we've actually got more documents than I think this discharge petition would have got or will get. It's kind of in the Venn diagram. There's quite a bit of overlap between the discharge petition and what we've subpoenaed in oversight. Where the discharge petition falls short is that we're not getting in the discharge petition the depositions of all these people.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing in people like the Clintons, bringing in all of these individuals, even prosecutors who failed their job, bringing them in, getting them on record, that is an important part of this investigation. And that's something that only the Oversight Committee has done. In addition, the Oversight Committee, in our subpoenas, we subpoenaed Jeffrey Epstein's estate. And from the estate is where we get the travel logs. We get his calendar. All of that information is extremely important. And I think but that uniquely has only been done by oversight. That is not included in the discharge petition. So I think that now what the discharge petition did that oversight has not subpoenaed yet is some of the FBI files. So, and I can't remember the number, but it's like 202 files or something. Those files where the FBI was taking notes and from their interviews with people, that will be substantively the difference in passing the discharge petition.
Okay, so let's break this down, because a lot there and a lot of really good stuff that should be explained there. First is, you would have supported a subpoena for Ghislaine Maxwell.
Absolutely.
But the problem is, if Democrats bring a subpoena for Ghislaine Maxwell, their interest is not, and I think they've made this abundantly clear, their interest is not justice for the victims.
Right.
It's bring Ghislaine Maxwell in and make this a whole circus to once again go after and try to get President Donald Trump.
Right.
And to your point about the pictures and the public statements that Trump has made about Jeffrey Epstein in the past. I don't really know the guy. Here he has some really weird habits, things like that. The emails that House Democrats released last week, a lot of which were mostly public already, but the content that did talk about President Trump before President Trump's political career, some of it during, some of it before, it was very clear that Epstein was no fan of President Trump. And,
it's clear. Yeah, in the communications, he hated Trump.
Right, and then Democrats were quoting Epstein's emails, saying Donald Trump is the worst person I know, end quote. And they instantly got ratioed on social media, saying, you know what? If Epstein doesn't think you're a good guy, that's actually a mark in your favor.
Right. Right.
So there's, the other thing too is, as you mentioned, people who took photos with or rubbed elbows with Jeffrey Epstein. The reason that we need transparency in this case is because anyone with a photo or anyone with any sort of connection is getting just slammed with all sorts of accusations.
That's right.
And we need those relationships within this network of people to be clarified. Was this a client of Jeffrey Epstein, as in a financial client,
right,
who did not have knowledge of the other things that Jeffrey Epstein was doing? Or was this somebody who was constantly riding the Lolita Express to the island,
right,
and engaging in terrible criminal activity,
right,
unspeakable acts?
Yeah.
And that's the type of transparency we need, not this fake transparency that
Right.
was weaponized against President Donald Trump, not only in his 4 years out of office, but is currently trying to be weaponized right now against him.
Yeah. Sunlight is the great disinfectant, right? And so the more that people understand about and are not being withheld, information is not being withheld, the more confident people will be. And I think to your point, for example, Stephen Hawking went to the island apparently. Eh, Um, I don't think anybody would suspect that he was involved in the in you know what I'm saying? No one.
Nope, it was a good example.
But it is an example of someone that is, because Epstein, it's not like he shakes your hand and first time he meets you and says, "Hey, I'm into little girls. How about you?" Right?
Mhm.
That is not something that a pervert is going to like bring you into that kind of world. And that is something that's, hidden, in their closet. They're not going to bring that forward in public setting. He clearly had a wide social network, including scientists. I mean, he was involved in a lot of strange like interests that some of which I think are somewhat noble, like
Mhm.
pursuing advancements in quantum physics and things like that. That's a noble thing. But what's not noble is the other stuff that he was doing behind closed doors.
Right, right. And were those charitable efforts, those philanthropic efforts, right? I mean, he had connections with Ivy League physicists and politicians and media personalities and sports stars. And so were those acts of philanthropy a veneer or
Yeah.
a way to drag people into the orbit, right? That's another question that
Maybe
remains
both.
unanswered.
I think
Maybe
it's
both.
both. Yeah.
Exactly. And so again, clarifying that relationship through transparency
hmm
and through investigations is the only way to condemn the right people and clear the right people. And so you mentioned what you guys have been doing over at the Oversight Committee, and you also mentioned the discharge petition. So first, tell the folks at home what the discharge petition is,
hmm
not only as a procedural mechanism, but how it worked in this case,
hmm
um, and dive a little bit deeper into those differences between the House Oversight's jurisdiction here and the
hmm
Epstein Files Transparency Act.
Yeah. So um, again, to kind of review, the Oversight Committee subpoenaed the Epstein files that the DOJ has. In addition, we subpoenaed the Epstein estate. We've already released about 65,000 pages
Oh, the
of
number's up
documents.
65,000.
Yes.
Okay, I heard it was like 33
Yeah, that was in the first batch. We've
first
released
batch,
65,000 pages of documents.
which people estimate the fullness of the Epstein files could be somewhere to like 90 to 100,000, potentially even higher than that. So
Okay.
this seems that's just what I've seen reported. Maybe you know more than I do on that matter, but it seems like we're getting towards a critical mass.
Yeah, and I think oversight has been tremendously successful, and probably has been more successful in the investigation and actually getting information than the Massey bill will accomplish, because we've subpoenaed individuals and we've got the Epstein estate files. But that is not included in the Epstein Disclosure Act that Massey sponsored and I co-sponsored. Now, the one, as I said before, the one unique area that that Massey's bill does is it brings in some of these FBI files that are considered like basically the notes. Like this is almost like the doctor's notes that whenever they're talking to a patient, oftentimes when a doctor releases their chart, they won't release their personal notes because that's their kind of deliberative process, right? So that it will force those files to be released. So that I think that will be a good thing. But the process and the mechanism for bringing this bill forward, and the reason why leadership didn't like the Massey bill is they felt like some of the protections were not strong enough, and so they wanted to go in and make amendments, and Massey would not agree to any of those changes. So they felt like that it could potentially expose some further victims, that it could potentially expose people who were innocent, but just kind of now caught into the net. And so leadership, was worried about that. They did not want Massey's bill to go forward without being amended. Well, the way that Massey stops the amendment process is by saying, we're going to do a discharge petition on the bill. Because according to the House rules, if you get, 218 signatures and to force a bill to come to the floor, there's no other motion that can be made. It comes directly to the floor for a vote. There's no even opportunity to amend it. So that was the mechanism that Massey used to force it to come to the floor. I would have preferred that he brought it to the floor and let us clean up because admittedly there's some site references that are in the bill that are wrong. So he's referencing some of the wrong sections of federal law, and that kind of stuff should be cleaned up. So to me, amending it, he should have been open to doing that. That's why and the other thing is that when you do a discharge petition, you're giving the middle finger to your own party and your own leadership, right? So Steve Scalise, who controls the floor, you're basically saying, you no longer have your job. We're taking over. That is what's considered a hostile action to your own party. And that, I think that's why for me, the way I put it whenever I was asked about this topic was, if we're getting enough information through oversight and we're not getting blocked, then I'm okay with not signing the discharge, forcing the other bill forward, because we're accomplishing essentially everything else in the Oversight Committee.
Mm-hmm.
But
that just takes time for staff to go through, and that would be
that's right.
A tranched approach. Over time, we would reach more and more of those Epstein documents.
Yeah, and so I felt like substantively, we're actually getting more in oversight than we would have through his bill, and through oversight, we're not giving the middle finger to leadership, right? And you're not doing a hostile action to force a bill to the floor, so without any kind of corrective amendments. So I kind of calculated that and thought, okay, no, I think because oversight is being successful in getting these documents, and the Department of Justice and the Trump administration, they need to be given credit. They've released the fact that we have 65,000 documents that have been handed over to oversight and we've released. They should be applauded for that. That is not something the Biden administration did. Joe Biden blocked every subpoena that we possibly sent to his administration. And we had to fight tooth and nail to get anything and everything. Trump has been very willing, his administration is very willing to work with oversight. And so but had they not been willing, and I made it very clear, if it became clear that even oversight is being blocked from getting these files, then I would be willing to do the hostile act of voting for a discharge petition, because then it's very clear that there's an effort to block transparency.
Right. Okay. So then, but you still have 4 Republicans join on to the discharge petition.
Yeah.
That was Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and of course Thomas Massey. That breaches 218 with the newly minted Representative Grijalva. Brought to the floor, and then it's a jailbreak. 427-1. It's a massive, one of the biggest margins I think ever in the House of Representatives. Trump kind of saw the writing on the wall and changed his tune, and this is part of the difficulty in separating out this morass. Right. So Trump has been very cooperative with the Oversight Committee on this. Trump made a campaign promise on the trail to release the Jeffrey Epstein files. Then in July of this year, as I believe Oversight was already working on the Epstein files, Trump comes out, the DOJ and FBI write that weird joint letter that says this is all kind of much ado about nothing, and we're not going to be further investigating anything relating to Jeffrey Epstein. That might be a little bit of an unfair characterization on my part. I'm just having trouble remembering the exact language. But basically it says we're not going to be looking into this any further than the FBI and DOJ already have. This comes on the heels of earlier providing that big binder of Jeffrey Epstein documents to people like Jack Posobiec, et cetera, et cetera. And
Which
Trump,
was an anemic binder,
right,
by the way.
right. That was not 38,000 documents or 65,000 documents now that the Oversight Committee has released. And then Trump kind of flips on this and starts calling it a hoax,
Right.
and exercises quite a lot of pressure on people who were signing that discharge petition. Obviously, everyone's seen the crack in the relationship between Marjorie Taylor Greene and President Donald Trump. Lauren Boebert was reportedly brought into the Situation Room to be taught to have a conversation about her support of the discharge petition. Why do you think the administration handled the things the way that they did with respect to the discharge petition? And you said that they've been cooperative, but has there been pressure from the administration on the oversight side to not poke your fingers into any certain pies?
So that's a lot of questions, but the
Yeah.
first one I'll say is to the last question. No, I've not had any kind of pressure to say, don't look into this area, right? That's not been the concern. And I don't know, I really don't know what the modus operandi is of the shift or the pivot in wanting to release it. And then early on saying, once he got in and Bondi kind of foibled, in my opinion, the release with the social media people, then they said, okay, we're done. Let's move on. I think that was a political mistake, because anytime you're talking about transparency and you say there's nothing to see here, then people say, wait a minute, what are we talking about, right? There's clearly something there. So
if there's nothing to see here, then why not just release the whole thing right away?
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I think, which is why it was really puzzling what was going on. I couldn't tell you. I have no idea what the thought process was. I can only speculate one theory, and that is that Trump has done these executive orders to release documents on other topics. JFK files is a great example of that. And they have released a ton of files related to JFK's assassination, some of which are extremely, extremely like groundbreaking, changing the narrative entirely about the assassination. And yet, as much as Trump has done, he's still having to fight the deep state to get some of these documents out and get them released.
And those narratives haven't broken through to the mainstream yet necessarily.
Right. And not because of any lack of appetite from the Trump administration. It's just that administration knows that they're dealing with a very dark deep state. The same deep state that that we saw do Arctic frost. These are the people you're going to and saying, give me the files. I think Trump has learned that he cannot trust the people that they're asking that are kind of gatekeeping what files. They will hold on to the files that exonerate somebody, and they'll release the things that condemn someone, right? So they can control that narrative because they just can be very difficult in what they're going to release. And a lot of times what we've learned is that unless you have the document number and you say, we want FBI file number XYZ, they'll say, what file are you talking about? We have no idea. We looked, we couldn't find that file. But when you give them a number, they can't ignore that, right? So that's the kind of thing that the deep state does. And I think if you're Trump, you're thinking, I've been here before. I've been blocked by the deep state on all these other efforts to disclose stuff. I know until we truly clean house in the DOJ, probably not going to get a really honest response from them. That's the best conjecture that I could have for this.
Yeah, you have to wait in order to get the proper transparency that you want because deep state actors are going to be trying to take you down.
Yeah.
And I mean, that much isn't surprising. One of the other things that the Epstein Files Transparency Act does is tries to make sure that this system of documents is as easily navigable as possible. I know that this is a priority of you guys over at the House Oversight Committee as well. They will release, as you said, the FBI will release certain information that condemns somebody while withholding evidence that makes that picture a little bit more complicated, or withholds information that would exonerate somebody caught up in a trap like this. And that's why easily navigable once it's made public is so important, because that's the other way that they continue to fight transparency, even if they've lost round one in the fight. So all
Hmm.
these documents come out, everybody cheers for transparency, but then you go to look at the Jeffrey Epstein files and it's a freaking mess. It's a government website. Nothing works. You can't Command F
Right.
search anything. And so how important is it to make sure that the American people can access
Yeah.
this in a way that's intuitive to them?
Yeah. It's extremely important. I mean, how else are you going to navigate 65,000 pages? I mean,
You mentioned the FBI file number. Like,
right.
you know how the FBI structures their codes for the names of certain files. How is the average American supposed to know that? They can't search FBI file 13X25 or whatever.
Yes, that's right. And so that I think that it's easy to kind of hide something. You could quote unquote release everything, but then put it in a form in which it's nearly impossible to navigate and find what you're looking for, right? But I think oversight has done the thoughtful process to make it. Not only did we release it, we've made it easy to comb through.
So,
You can literally do Control F.
right, exactly. But
Yeah.
that's all people want, right? I want to be able to Control F a name
Hmm.
and see everything that the Epstein files says about, whether it's Robert Maxwell or President Trump or
Hmm.
Wexner, any of the people even tangentially associated with the orbit. You want to be able to find out exactly what folks were saying or what the connection was there. The Epstein Files Transparency Act focuses on all unclassified information.
Hmm.
That has been a cause of alarm for some, because a lot of people think that this was part of an intelligence operation, perhaps.
Hmm. That's one of the like prevailing theories in this town is that Epstein was connected to intelligence.
That Epstein was connected to intelligence. And we say that because when he was first brought up on charges relating to
Hmm.
sexual exploitation of minors, he was given an incredibly lenient sentence. He was able
By
to,
Acosta, yeah.
yep, he was able to, leave the prison and then come back and sleep there at night.
Hmm.
They had this global immunity designation, which was unprecedented for the types of charges that were being brought against him. And of course, you mentioned Alex Acosta. Alex Acosta at one point allegedly said that he was told that Epstein belonged to intelligence. And it gets really weird really quickly when you look at the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell, his partner in crime, her father was Robert Maxwell. He was known to have connections to the Mossad, to MI6, to the KGB.
Right.
You look at Robert Maxwell's funeral, it was full of massive figures from all around the political arena, the political world, but in particular, a bunch of high-ranking Israeli officials were at that funeral.
Hmm.
Another thing is Epstein's close relationship to Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister, who spent lots of time at Jeffrey Epstein's house. I believe he lived in the Manhattan house for a period of time. I could be wrong, so I apologize if I am. But all this is to say, a lot of people see these intelligence connections and they go, okay, if it's everything that's unclassified already, shouldn't there be a declassification effort? And how would that work?
Hmm.
Are people really scared of releasing the Epstein files? Because as Chuck Schumer said on, what was it, MSNBC, on that Sunday morning show all those years ago, the intel agencies can really screw with you.
Yeah, they've got what was it? They got many ways to mess with you. Right?
Exactly.
Many ways to yeah. I think that could be, that is a very plausible explanation because, as you said, this town has kind of pulled together all these connections, and that's what you're hearing through the rumor mill. And I'm not talking about just from politicians. I mean, from people in the intelligence community. When I'm talking to a lot of these people, that's what they'll kind of go. They'll kind of what they personally know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it tends to kind of point in that direction. If that's true, you can understand why Trump would not want that to come out. because it would be a scandal that would eclipse the Iran-Contra affair, right? It would be bigger than Fast and Furious. If you had
even if it doesn't happen under President Trump's tenure, it's just
even if he's not guilty, even if he's innocent of it, it will occupy the remainder of his presidency, this investigation, this scandal. And I think that, and it may, if there's connections to Mossad and Israel, then you've got foreign implications. Like you have allies that are now caught into this. The global animosity towards Israel would only be escalated, and not just there's a global animosity, but you've got this crazy insurgent left that is anti-Semitic, right? This would only kind of feed some of that. So I'm not saying that is true. I'm just saying that these are possibilities that would certainly cause a president who is completely innocent to pause and say, maybe we should be very careful about what's
right.
released here.
If I bring out all this stuff and it turns out that it was a KGB operation because Maxwell had KGB connections, right? What does that mean for my efforts to end the war in Ukraine? What is the appropriate governmental response to that type of operation? What is the appropriate response if it's an Israeli operation? What's the appropriate response if it's a CIA operation? I understand that it would completely chew up his second term. But there's a part of me that thinks, so be it, right? Like, if the next 2.5 years are spent going to war with the CIA in the intel services,
yeah, maybe that's needed.
Like maybe that is the best use of the president's time. I would understand a hesitance, to say we're not going to, we're going to have a much more difficult time on our hands if we go after the CIA. But I feel like he was elected in large part to go after the deep state, and the most pernicious, the most conniving part of that deep state is not the people who work at the EPA, even though they're allowed to have guns now for some reason. It's not the people who work at HUD that are giving, all these federal grants to crappy NGOs with left-wing priorities. The most dangerous people in the deep state are in the intel services. They are in the national security apparatus, the foreign policy blob in this town, because they have the authority. And the CIA brags about this. They have the authority to do covert operations.
And many of which are illegal.
Many of which are illegal.
Or they're participating with terrorist cells. And I mean, a lot of the things that some of the things the CIA has done would cause every American to be disgusted.
Right. And they have secret budgets. They have all sorts of secrecy surrounding them. And, maybe folks like me are a little bit out over our skis about how much influence the CIA actually has, the nature of CIA involvement in certain, foreign policy developments in the United States over time. Sure. But I haven't been given sufficient evidence publicly that brings those concerns or those considerations too much into doubt, right? Like the CIA's history in getting involved with nasty actors that ultimately come back to bite not only themselves but the American people and the American nation in the butt is well documented.
Yes.
So all that is to say, what type of action could Congress take? Is that something that the Oversight Committee can do with respect to trying to launch a declassification effort? Is there ways that that Congress can add some pressure to the administration to declassify what is necessary if what we find out in the unclassified version of the Epstein files are insufficient?
I think that when the FBI files are released, there will be, if there are connections made that would point in a direction for us to actually do an effort to declassify, that will be the impetus for that. But until that point, what are you asking for, right? Like you end up in that very circular argument that we talked about earlier, which is you don't know what you don't know, right? And so you don't know what to ask. And so until we get at least some breadcrumbs from the documents that are going to be released that might point in a direction that then I think that we'll have the conversation about some form of disclosure.
The next fight after this Epstein fight is going to be over healthcare. It's going to be over those Obamacare subsidies we mentioned at the top of the episode. I was surprised as surprised as anyone when Republicans managed to end the shutdown without giving away any sort of the game on Obamacare subsidies. All that was promised is a future vote on these subsidies, not as they currently are constituted, but likely as a result of bipartisan negotiations. Some sort of deal needs to be struck, probably starting in the Senate and then brought down to the House. We've had a lot of conversations about whether or not these subsidies should just be put into HSAs and let the American people decide what they do with their healthcare dollars. First, tell us a little bit about the Obamacare subsidies. And second, how should we be thinking about this healthcare conversation over the next month?
Yeah, so Obamacare really is, we had this health cost crisis in America. And the Democrats' answer is, we know we will force people to buy insurance. They want to buy healthcare, but we're going to force them to buy insurance. And what it did is it basically put insurance companies in a very strong position. And now you've seen consolidation. So now you've got fewer and fewer health carriers that all basically have a product that you are forced to buy, and that your employer is forced to buy, right? So that in and of itself creates for a dynamic where there's not really any kind of price transparency and there's very little choice. So I think their end goal was single payer. And the architect of Obamacare is on the record in some kind of interview session where he's admitted that if they actually had to sell the people on the concept of Obamacare, it would have failed. But instead, they pitched it as, if you like your doctor, you can keep it. Premiums are going to go down. All of those lies. And he admitted that it was designed to collapse the system and create such a crisis of fiscal costs that the American people would be revolting and demanding single payer. That was the goal. And then we get to, so it already was a bastardized, healthcare system. Now we get to COVID, and Joe Biden steps in. And what does he do? He says, people hate Obamacare. I know, I'm going to write checks to the insurance companies and hope that the insurance companies, relay that relief to the consumer, to the person paying the premiums. And we now know that was not happening. Okay. So that's why I think Trump's response in saying, I'm not doing these subsidies. I'm not doing this game with insurance that the Democrats did at all. And the fact that he's completely taken that off the table is a breath of fresh air, right? Because this town, you've been here a while. You could predict that this town, what was it? Reagan said, the closest thing to eternal life that we'll ever see is a government program.
Yep.
And, here's a government program. You have moderate Republicans saying, oh, we can't, they're like wringing their hands. We can't go into the next midterm election without extending these subsidies because people's premiums are going to go up. Well, guess what? Their premiums are going up, even with the subsidies. So when people's premiums are going up,
because Obamacare subsidies have given them the market power in order to fleece the American consumer, the American people.
Not only given them the power, but incentivize them to fleece the American people because insurance companies are allowed to only make 15% on the cost, right, of what they're paying to healthcare. Well, it's like turning your waitress who gets 15% or 18%, knowing that that's the tip, and asking her, what should we order for a meal? The waitress is going to say, well, surf and turf, right? Or whatever. And you have to get desserts. You got to get apps.
Yeah.
They want to drive
Free
up.
of the Japanese Wagyu strips is probably.
That's right. So this is what the position we literally the Democrats' plan for reducing healthcare costs was basically turning the insurance companies into a waiter who gets 15% of whatever the spend is.
Mhm.
And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what the end result is going to be. So Trump says, not doing that. Not at all. It's not going to happen. And then he kind of throws this idea, which I personally, frankly, think we should go to a solution that doesn't involve any kind of government subsidies. But I think at least this is in a better direction than where we are today. And so this is, for me, this is exciting because when we were doing talks about the one big beautiful bill and reconciliation, I was going to the microphone a year ago, literally going to the microphone a year ago after we had won and we knew that we were going to take over. We were planning reconciliation. And I always go to the conference microphone in front of my 220 plus colleagues and say, we have to include healthcare reform because Obama, and I would give all the reasons why. And then I would be told why that is not, there's no appetite for that. That's not what we're going to do. You're just kind of complicated. I feel like now I'm vindicated maybe it's because
they had to do it to make ends meet.
Right.
It was a fiscal necessity when you're going through budget reconciliation, right? That's why they loaded, what was it, $830 billion of cuts that needed to be accomplished by the Committee for Health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, almost $1 trillion. Actually, it was closer to $1 trillion that was cut from Medicaid. But all of that to say, they didn't want to talk about it then, but the Democrats have given us, in my opinion, a gift because them demanding this has exposed it. And when you ask the American people, do you want to extend the COVID era enhanced subsidies to insurance companies? The polling is awful. The American people, if you pitch it that way, now the American people are right in saying healthcare sucks, it's expensive, and I'm not getting a good, product for what I'm paying. They are absolutely right. And they should be looking to the failures of Obamacare. And that's what I want to have that debate. I absolutely want to have reconciliation 2.0 and the central piece of that should be a complete overhaul of the healthcare system. And I'm not talking about tinkering around the edges. Right now, there's a lot of discussion that, we'll take some of the healthcare policies and bills that were left on the table that we didn't do, and we'll do those. So that like tweak HSAs, tweak ICRA, make changes. All of it is tinkering. And at the end of the day, that is not going to fix the system. And if you're going to take ownership of it, because once Republicans pass something, now we're going to be the ones guilty of the outcome. Mm-hmm. To me, I would rather just go in. You're going to have to do it anyway. Rip it all out and put something in that's truly free market, that returns choice back to the consumer, encourages them to spend their dollars on healthy food, like on the front, be healthy on the front end, do wellness programs, fitness, that kind of stuff. Encourage people to do that so that you're not paying for it on the back end, right? All of those kind of things. Then make the consumer be the person that's going to the doctor saying, hey, what's the cost of this? And if you're not going to tell me the cost, I'm going to go to the next door because I can. I'm not committed to your network, doc, right? So when you give people back their freedom, I think you suddenly have capitalism, like let capitalism work, the people will love it.
Yeah, you can't really have a market without a price mechanism, and price transparency, I think, is a massive priority for everyone. I think like price transparency in healthcare polls like 99 to 1%. And the 1% is the healthcare CEO that ended up being a part of this Pew Research poll or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, you don't have to even legislate transparency if you give people the choice, right, and the control over their own dollars. Because look, when you drive down the street and you're looking for a gas station and there's no law that says the gas stations have to put, in bold, huge letters, the price of what the cost of a gallon is. They do it because they know no one's going to drive in there unless they are displaying that, right? Mm-hmm. And so transparency, when people have choice, And when people are in control of their dollars, they will seek transparency, and only those businesses or doctors that provide that transparency will get business.
Final question to you, and then we're going to jump back to the Epstein files for this one because I wanted to close on this. What are the major questions that you're looking to be answered in the next few months on this issue? What should the American people be watching for?
On the Epstein files? I think we need to get to the bottom of, some of the victims' depositions, because in some of those documents that the FBI has where they took notes from some of these victims, what I'm told is there are names of other Johns, other men that were involved in sexual acts. And I'm hopeful that if that's true, that we're able to get that put forward. Because those victims deserve to have justice. They deserve for the law enforcement system that was supposed to keep a little girl safe, that failed these women when they were little girls. They deserve to have that protection and transparency.
Congressman Eric Burlison, thank you for coming on the Signal Sitdown.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Signal Sitdown. Before you go, be sure to hit like and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may be joining us. And please remember to give us a 5-star review. We not only love your feedback, but it really does help the show. Remember, it's your government, and together we'll expose how it really works. See you next time.